Yo, 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 welcome back to the Anomalies of History, Part 3. And in this chapter, we're going to get very much into the history of Babylon and the symbolism of the lion. So I titled this Part 3, The BabyLion King. Let's get into it. So I've mentioned this story many times before on my podcast, but it's essential to the evolution of this story. In 2003, I took my niece to Egypt. We were all alone because the big war was going on in Iraq. So we had the whole place to ourselves. And during my time there, as I'd mentioned in a previous episode, I met a wisdom keeper called Hakim. Now, I hadn't mentioned anything to anybody that my mum was sick with cancer while I was in Egypt. And I actually run the risk of not ever seeing her again. But luckily, by the time I got home, I just had enough time to see her go in the hospital. But what's so special about this story is while I was in Egypt, I went to visit Hakim at his house. I will get into more about Hakim in the next few chapters. And he just came out and said, your mum is sick and I'm going to send some energy to her via the Sphinx, which I thought was a very bizarre thing to say. But he claimed it was some kind of energy device. And he told me straight up that she will know. I got back from the UK on Friday night and my mum was morphined up. She was aware that I was there and we had a chat. And I managed to get all the family together and she passed away on the Tuesday. Bless your mum. But on the Monday, even though she was heavily dosed with morphine and she was not supposed to be able to move, she sat up in the bed and she looked me in the eyes for a brief moment. And all I could think about was Hakim telling me that she will know. And from that moment on, I have never, ever looked back. And I've always been passionate to understand more about this esoteric wisdom and this energy that obviously surrounds us. And most of us don't know what it is. And that's one of the reasons why I've started this epic presentation to sort of deliver some, cool information and maybe get you thinking that there is something special to this planet, not just go to work and eat and sleep. So the interesting thing is I've always looked at the Sphinx. Some people claim that it was never a lion, but to me, you look at the base of it, even though it's had a lot of renovation, it does look like a lion. Or if we think about the mythical creature that is the Sphinx, interestingly, it was always like part woman. It was the head of a human, the body of a lion, and the wings of an eagle. But they said in Greek tradition, it was depicted as a woman. And I find that very interesting because we're going to get into genetics in a little while. So yeah, I believe it was a lion. And interestingly, if we look into the history of Babylon, which is kind of where a lot of history starts, now the Babylonians called the Leo constellation Gula, which meant the great lion. And there's a lot of books, Graham Hancock, Robert Bauval, that have put the beginning of civilization in the age of Leo by using, star charts to track back when Leo was in the sky in front of the pyramids. And that would make sense to me if I was a civilization, outer planetary civilization that came to Earth for terraforming to start agriculture, and because their planet had been destroyed or it needed time to regenerate, then you would build temples and you would either represent what's in the sky at the time as a timestamp, or possibly that could be a connection as to where you'd come from. There is no doubt in my mind that there's a connection with Leo, there's a connection with a lion, the baby lion, and in Egypt. All right. So interestingly, never read the Epic of Gilgamesh at school, sadly. I came across that maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and a lot of people don't know what it was. In the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the main city is called Uruk. And this is an artist impression of this lost city of Uruk, which bizarrely enough is in Iraq. And, why do you think there's always these wars at specific times when all these like great finds happen? Suddenly the military goes in, and we've seen that in many countries where they've just absolutely hijacked sites, destroyed them, gone in museums, and they blame it on terrorists, which is really sad. We're never going to get to the bottom of anything if they keep removing, the evidence. So what was the city of Uruk? Again, here we are. It's got connections to Babylonian times, and it's also known as the second city of Nimrod, which I'm going to get into the history of Nimrod, who was one of the kings of Babylonia. This is what that city, Uruk, now looks like, it used to be what's called a ziggurat. And what is a ziggurat? I mean, just look at that for a second. How many people know about that? Not many tourists go there, is my guess. It's not really talked about too much. But this is an ancient city just lying in the desert, just like Egypt, and nobody's excavating it. Nobody wants to find out any information. It just, people, some people especially, just prefer it to be lost and forgotten. So what is a ziggurat? Well, a ziggurat was like an ancient temple that was kind of like built from steps. And some people say that they went deep underground as well. And here, as it says on Wiki, that the Sumerians believed that the gods lived in the temple at the top of the ziggurats. So only special priests and other highly respected individuals could enter. That's kind of like in the modern world now, you've got rich people living at the top of skyscrapers. So all the little people in the village would climb these ziggurats, offering their agricultural goods to the gods, when really it was probably a small handful of people who was using religion to brainwash people that just lived a life of luxury while everybody else was slaving away and bringing them free food all day. Makes a lot of sense, right? Now, interesting is I'm a huge film fan, and I studied a lot about these logos. And you've got Paramount here, which is doing some of the best TV right now. But how many of you have noticed the logo of Paramount? First of all, you've got a mountain. Now, just open your mind a little bit, but there is loads of stories and conspiracies about places around the world, especially mountains like in Tibet and Nepal, even in America, Mount Hood. There's loads of UFO activity. But if you wanted to hide a base somewhere in plain sight, there's no better place to do that than a mountain. And there is evidence. I mean, even my dad used to tell me about underground submarine bases. These things have been going for years. But notice these 13 stars as well. That's very symbolic. And we'll get into all that in a little while. Now, I just found out that that mountain is actually called Ben Lomond, not Lot Lomond, which, funny enough, is where my parents' ashes are buried. But what we have here is a tie to Utah, which is very, very much into the secret societies, the Mormons and everything. There's all these stories about underground bases with genetic experiments going on. And you've got also here a connection to the Scottish Highlands. And we talked a little bit so far about Freemasons, but you've got the Scottish Rite. So anywhere where I see connections to the Scots or anywhere Utah, there's definitely something going on big around them areas. And that's why they have this symbol on these movies. Now, here's a picture of Gilgamesh, and of course, he's holding his little baby lion. Again, what's this thing about lions? I'm not sure what the tool is, but there's definitely a lion there, as you can see. And of course, I just got to show a little clip for a bit of nostalgia to all you 80s kids. You've got the Thundercats. I grew up watching this, and it's interesting when you go back and watch it. There's loads of little bits and pieces you can pull out from cartoons in the past, like little secrets that they let out, and it's all subliminal. That you don't really understand what it is as a kid, but you're being told truths all the time. So I'd like to show you the intro, and we're going to get into obviously a lot to do with thunder and lightning. So I just thought it was appropriate to show this little clip.
Thundercats.
And welcome back again. And of course, if you're a movie fan like me, where do we see the lion all the time? At the beginning of movies, how many times have you heard that roar? Have you ever questioned why? It's lion symbolism. It's important stuff, right? And of course, you've got Lionsgate as well. Now, if all these links are meaningless to you at the moment, then you have to ask, why does England have 3 lions on its flag? And notice that those lions, they only have 3 claws, which always baffled me. And notice the roses as well, right? Very important. We'll get into that in a second. So a lion clearly has 5 paws. Why not make it accurate on a flag? All right. Now here we come across Ishtar, and Ishtar was one of the queens, queen of heaven, apparently, in Babylon. And what I find interesting here is the symbolism of Ishtar. She's obviously half human. She's got wings, and then we've got the lions at the bottom, and then we've got the owls as well, which is very symbolic, which I'll get into a little bit in a second. But notice the feet of Ishtar. She's obviously some kind of mutant. She's got 3 webbed feet. Very interesting, right? 3 claws on the flag of England as well. So here, Ishtar, she was the goddess of love, beauty, marriage, desire, fertility, war, justice, and political power. And she was also known as Inanna, which sounds like Diana, the Lady of Heaven, and had a major influence on the development of the Greek goddess Aphrodite. So all these gods that came before or after, they're all linked together. All right. And here's a little interesting story about Easter. This is where we get the etymology from Ishtar, Easter. And Easter was originally the celebration of Ishtar, the Assyrian and Babylonian goddess of fertility and sex. Her symbols, like the egg and the bunny, were and still are about fertility and sex symbols. Or did you actually think that eggs and bunnies had anything to do with the resurrection? All right. So also, what most people don't know, like all these traditions that we celebrate, they're all originally pagan traditions. So here, the hare itself is revered in law. Even in pre-Christian times, it was seen as a holy creature associated with fertility and the returning spring. So many old religions had a spring goddess, a special deity who breathed life back into the world, both by banishing old man winter and by encouraging growing things to grow and living things to mate. And she went by many names. The Scandinavians called her Ostra, the Anglo-Saxons Eostre, and those who lived in the region that is now Germany knew her as Istre. All right, so we celebrate these things, but actually we're celebrating possibly dark forces. And these people, they were all about sacrificing children. All right. Now here we have a picture of the giant pine cone at the Vatican. I've never been to the Vatican, but I've read so much about it. Of course, you've got a couple of lines at the bottom here. But if you remember in the previous episode, I showed you a picture of Marduk, who's also Bel, who's this god of Babylon, and he was holding the pine cone in his hand. Now, some people have stated that Ishtar actually came down from another planet in a spacecraft that was egg-shaped. I don't know if I believe that, but apparently this is supposed to represent that craft, or it's representing fertility and sex in a church that bans those kind of things. It's all a little bit suspicious to me. Now, let's have a look deeper into this Inanna. So she was told to be the Queen of Heaven. She was the patron goddess of the Inanna temple at the city of Uruk, and she's also associated to the planet Venus. Okay. Now, interestingly, is that she's also got symbols. The 8-pointed star, which is called the Star of Ishtar. All right. And the owl was also one of Ishtar's primary symbols. So how many times have we seen this star around? We'll get more into this later. All right. So I just want to point out here as well, there's a connection to the Clash of the Titans. There's the owl, right? All worshiping these Babylonian gods. You know, this is things that we watch as kids. We don't know what we're watching or what we're worshiping, but interesting stuff. And then also connected to Ishtar is the Rosette. All right. Now, why is that important? Because that is my first lead into the Rosicrucians, and they have a big say on how things go down in the world. They have a ton of information that nobody else can get their hands on. They are a secret brotherhood with probably all access to the Vatican files. You know, apparently there's 15 miles of secret rooms under the Vatican. This is all the real history of the world, which we get indoctrinated in school and get a tiny snippet of that. So this is the purpose of my presentation, is to try and open up, try and link everything together and give you a real understanding of our history. and not somebody's story. All right. So the Ishtar is connected to Tammuz. What we have was Nimrod was apparently the king of Babylon. Ishtar was the wife, and then Tammuz was the son. And the parents of Tammuz as well is connected to Enki, which we talked about in the previous episode as well. So we've got the three, the first trilogy there, Nimrod, Ishtar, and Tammuz. And also Ishtar was the Egyptian equivalent known as Isis. All right. So all these names over the history, they just change into different names with different cultures and different religions. So here, I just want to read this out. This is a story of Nimrod, and Ishtar's other name is Semiramis and Tammuz. So most people will be aware of the claims made regarding Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz, these three characters being the start of pagan sun god worship throughout the world. There are actually a few different stories about the pagan trinity, as they are sometimes called, but the most popular version is that Nimrod and Semiramis were king and queen of Babylon. They ruled the people and turned them against God. However, Nimrod eventually died, and Semiramis, in a desperate attempt to hold on to her throne, derived a plan that would ultimately lead to not only retaining the throne, but would elevate her to that of goddess. So Semiramis claimed that after Nimrod had died, he ascended to the sun and became the sun god himself. She then told the people that her son, which depending on which version is being told, was conceived before Nimrod died or through an extramarital source, was the reincarnation of the sun god, and that she had been impregnated by the rays of the sun. She would later marry her son, called Tammuz, who was Nimrod reincarnated, which is why some people incorrectly say that the story has Nimrod marrying his mother. In some versions, Tammuz is killed by a wild boar, and in some versions, he is cut up into pieces. Now, where do we hear this story? This religion went underground, hidden, and this religion has since remained and integrated itself into every major culture of the earth. Each religion's central characters can be traced back to Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. They became the gods of Egypt, in Greece, and also, much later, here's Osiris, Isis, and Horus. It's the same story. And then we have Mary, Joseph, and the baby. So I think it's very interesting that. Now, here, I mentioned before that Ishtar has a direct connection to Venus. And I found this statue of Venus. And I just want to point out some key features, which we'll get into more in the next chapter. Notice here, especially the covering of the genitals, which hides the fact that she could be male or female. She's got curly hair, the straightness of the nose, and the androgynous characteristics, like out of shape in the middle. Even though she's got breasts, that doesn't really matter. She could be a man or a woman. This is where we're going to get into some really crazy stuff. Thank you for listening to this chapter. I hope it was interesting, and I'll see you in part 4. Having it large.